Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is my Masters of the Universe story. This is how I discovered the Masters Universe franchise and how I've been a lifelong fan ever since. And keeping in mind that this is my recollection from a long time ago, so this may or may not be entirely accurate, but my memory is that I discovered Masters Universe when I was in kindergarten. I have a vague memory of watching at least part of an episode in the morning before class began. It was a syndicated show, right? This is something a lot of people don't understand about cartoons back then, but most of the ones that were promoting toy lines aired during the weekdays and they were syndicated. And so TV stations could pretty much air it whenever they wanted to. It could be in the morning, it could be in the afternoon, it could be both. But that was a vague recollection that I was probably had a little bit of exposure. And I believe one of my friends brought a mini comic that came with the action figures to like show and tell or whatever it was called back then in my class. And I was really intrigued by it. And I borrowed one of the mini comics he had. And so it was this one, The Menace of Man-E-Faces. And here's where it gets a little odd because my memory is I borrowed this thing, loved it to death, and dropped it in the toilet. And so to make this up to my friend, my parents bought me a Masters of the Universe figure, Man-E-Faces, so we could get the mini comic to give him a brand new, non-soggy version of that comic. And of course, I ended up keeping the action figure. And I'm not sure if I had any other action figures at the time. Of course, I was very young. My recollection was that when I was playing with Man-E-Faces, I actually was pitting him against a snake made of blocks, which with some research I found out was from Rubik's Cube. And I would twist that thing into, a monstrous snake for Man-E-Faces to fight. But of course, I ended up getting plenty of other figures over the next few years. Masters Universe was one of my main toys that I played with, and I got action figures and play sets and vehicles and all that good stuff. And part of the draw was these mini comics. From a parent's point of view, you're getting your child something to read, and that's good for their, education or whatever. But from a child's point of view, these are wonderful stories. I mean, you are getting a comic with the figure, and these things were awesome. I mean, this was my introduction to sword and sorcery, and they just did a great job of coming up with some great dark fantasy stories that they could tell in mini comics. And the level of talent on these mini comics was unbelievable. This first one was by Gary Kahn and had artwork by Mark Texeira, both of which were professional and very good comic book creators. The previous wave of mini comics had Conan artist Alfredo Alcala on it. And you also had future legends like Larry Houston, who would go on to do X-Men the Animated Series, and Bruce Timm, who would, of course, do Batman the Animated Series. You're looking at Larry Houston pencils inked by Bruce Timm. Yes, they both worked on the same comic. But the Filmation cartoon was also amazing. Now, it didn't have necessarily the same action that you would get in the mini comics. The villains weren't necessarily as menacing or evil, but the fantasy elements of that series were amazing. I mean, every episode, you were going to a new lost city or facing a new monster or facing a new villain. I mean, it was just amazing. Just the sheer amount of imagination was just incredible. And so it was really the stories that brought me into Masters Universe. And the narrative of the franchise was nowhere near as refined as G.I. Joe and Transformers that were developed by Marvel Comics. However, I think that kind of looser, less defined narrative let creators do a lot of amazing things. It gave them a lot of freedom to come up with their own kind of elements to add into the mix. You would get great new characters like Granomir the Dragon and Skytree. And two of Larry Houston's mini comics actually had brand new villains in them. And this one is actually an adaptation of a Filmation episode that was loosely based on the Edgar Rice Burroughs novel Tarzan and the City of Gold. Like I said, anything can happen on Eternia. And so, of course, we ended up getting our first movie, which was actually He-Man, She-Ra, The Secret of the Sword. This was an animated movie by Filmation. And so this was a summarized version of the first five-parter that opened the She-Ra cartoon. She-Ra was, of course, a spin-off of Masters Universe. She was He-Man's sister who fought the evil Horde on another planet called Etheria. And yes, kids, this is the comic that they gave out at the theaters that summarized the movie, and I still have it to this day. I thought the She-Ra animated series was a good extension of Masters in Universe. I did watch it mainly for the He-Man crossovers, but I did enjoy the characters, and I loved the evil Horde. However, I don't know too many other boys who did the same, or at least would admit to it. It was just a different time. Female heroes were just thought of as kind of a girl's thing. It was, like I said, very different, right? Nowadays, we have female heroes all over the place, and they're watched by male and female audiences without any problem, but it was just different back then. And they did have She-Ra figures, but they didn't look like the animated series, and they were really dolls, right? They got the rooted hair, and as you can tell from how much of a mess She-Ra's hair is, I don't know what to do with this thing. I just got it because it was He-Man's sister, and I was curious about the mini comic it came with. I did get one other. This is Sweet Bee, and I think I got her as a gift for someone that didn't get given, and so I just ended up keeping this one. And as you can tell, she's even a bigger mess than She-Ra is. Guys just don't know what to do with rooted hair. And that was it for the She-Ra figures for me, because as much as I love Masters Universe, it's not going to make me collect a line of dolls. And then there was the 1987 live-action movie starring Dolph Lundgren as He-Man and Frank Langella as Skeletor. I love this movie. It is so well made. No, it didn't have as big a budget as it should have. And yes, it is relatively small in scope. It doesn't have like a million different characters, but it told a fantastic story that we had been waiting for the entire franchise of them going to Earth. That was teased in so many Filmation episodes, and we finally got to see it here. We finally got to see Skeletor take Grayskull, take over the planet. And I think the thing that you have to understand about movies back then that promoted toys is that they were put out as one story among many, right? It was going to give you something bigger that you hadn't seen before, introduce some new characters that you could buy as the figures, but it wasn't meant to be like this be-all, end-all to give the origin story and have every single character in it like we see with later adaptations of properties, like you would see with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie or something like that. This was meant to be a story among many, and I gotta tell you, I loved it. And just in case you're wondering, Cyclone is my favorite Masters Universe heroic warrior. He is a more high-tech kind of hero. He has like tornado powers. He can create like whirlwinds and stuff similar to Red Tornado in DC Comics. And he's got a radar for his chest. I just think he looks really freaking cool. And then Modulok is my favorite villain because he looks cool, right? He looks like a freaking monster. And you can take them apart, put them together again in 1,000 different monstrous combinations. But he also has the most interesting backstory and characterization because he was a scientist named Galen Nycroft who turned himself into this monster and then joined the evil horde. He's actually from Eternia, and so he turns coat and joins the evil horde on Etheria. So he's just got a lot of interesting stuff going on, and he's one of those few hordemen who can actually hold the whole episode by himself, right? He can go toe-to-toe with She-Ra just because he can come up with all these gizmos to fight the most powerful woman in the universe. Masters of the Universe would end as a franchise in America around 1987. The fad had run its course, and kids had moved on to other things. They would bring He-Man back a few years later in the late 80s, as a new toy line simply called He-Man and a new animated series called The New Adventures of He-Man. And this is a more science fiction take on the character, in which He-Man goes to the future to a planet called Primus to protect the last of humanity from evil mutants led by Skeletor. And New Adventures tried to do for science fiction space operas what Masters Universe had done for fantasy, and I don't think it was as effective as the original Filmation cartoon, but I think it had some great ideas, some good animation, and it was cool to see them actually be able to get out of just episodic self-contained storytelling to develop some of its characters. And they had some really epic five-parters that they weren't able to do back in Filmation that told some really epic stories, including one that ended the series with the final battle between He-Man and Skeletor that to this day I think was absolutely perfect, and to me is the definitive fate of Skeletor. I'd aged out of collecting the figures by then, so I didn't get any of the toys. And unfortunately, the toy line and the show just didn't catch on. And so He-Man would once again go away, and this time it would be for many years. And then in 2002, He-Man returned with a new animated series and toy line. Now, He-Man and the Masters Universe by Mike Young Productions that started in 2002 was a different kind of series. It told very similar stories to Filmation, but it started from the beginning, right? Filmation never gave us an origin for anything and did completely episodic storytelling. This was serialized storytelling that begins with the origin of how Adam got the power sword and developed a backstory for Eternia and for who Skeletor was and who all these different characters were. And it was fascinating stuff. We even found out where Grayskull comes from, and it was just amazing. I had a friend, I worked at a grocery store at that point, and I had a friend who, for whatever reason, was able to watch the episode before I did. I think I may have had a conflict when it originally aired, but I was able to catch a rerun. And he would tell me about these episodes before I was able to see them. And he would describe them. I mean, they would be like the best thing in the world, right? It's like, oh my God, they have Stratus in there and he sounds like Sean Connery. And they're like, Moss Man is the coolest thing ever. And they made Stinkor funny and interesting and and I tell you, every episode lived up to his hype. It was an amazing thing. I loved all the characters they introduced. It made me love Moss Man. It made me love Stinkor, characters I just never thought I would like. And it was just such a great series. Unfortunately, it did end prematurely after only 2 seasons. After teasing the evil horde, there was an episode showing them in ancient Eternia, teasing that they would be coming back to modern day to fight the Masters. And unfortunately, the show was ended before that could happen. It was heartbreaking. As far as the toy line went, I really phased out of getting toys. I wasn't playing with them anymore, and I wasn't really into collecting. And I really didn't have any room to display anything anyway. I was still living at my parents', but I did end up getting a He-Man figure that I proudly displayed in my room. And while there were unfortunately no mini comics with the 2002 figures, the He-Man figure did come with a videotape of an old Filmation episode. And so that bonus was probably one of the reasons I bought that figure. If they had included mini comics, I probably would have got more at the time. But eventually I would pick up more figures afterwards. And I, of course, ended up getting Cyclone because he's my favorite. And the figures are extraordinary. I mean, this is the first time the Four Horsemen got to sculpt Masters of the Universe figures, and they really left their mark on the franchise. And the 2002 cartoon and toy line did a couple of things. First of all, it got all of us old fans on the internet talking about those episodes. We talked about how much we loved them. We talked about our fan theories. And this created an online community for Masters of the Universe that would gather on He-Man.org. And there were a lot of us. And the Four Horsemen were fans of Masters of the Universe as well. And so they pitched to Mattel to do a new Masters of the Universe toy line, but this time it was going to be a 7-inch collector's line. And this would be aimed at adult collectors, and it became Masters of the Universe Classics. And it was available through subscription. You subscribe to a year of figures, and they would mail you the different figures for that year. Now, I did not do the subscription service. It was very expensive and involved getting a whole lot of very large figures. However, there was a point at which Mattel was trying to get some stuff out of their warehouse, and so they put a bunch of Classics figures at Big Lots for very cheap. And so I ended up getting some of those. And I also ended up getting a good deal on a Classic Cyclone at a convention because, have I said this before? He's my favorite. Now, Classics would run for years and years and years and prove there is an audience for Masters of the Universe and you can make money off of it. And that would lead to us getting an ongoing series from DC Comics that would last for years. And there was an excellent new She-Ra cartoon from DreamWorks that ran on Netflix for quite a few seasons. And so all of this snowballs until in 2020, Masters of the Universe made its triumphant return to store shelves with Masters of the Universe Origins, which was a 5.5-inch line based on the original figures, but with updated sculpts and paint jobs, modern articulation, and modular parts that you can mix and match. And yes, they came with mini comics. And honestly, guys, when Origins began, I thought it was just going to be the original figures and that was going to be it. But no, they kept going past those early figures to almost everything we ever got in that old toy line, right? There's only a few figures left for them to complete the vintage collection, and we have gotten so many figures that we never got in the old line. There are She-Ra figures that look like they're straight out of Filmation, and I don't have to comb their hair. And for those who want that big scale that Classics was on, they kept that going with a line called Masterverse. And Masterverse has given us some great figures I never thought we'd get, like affordable versions of the 87 movie characters. And my understanding is Masterverse shall be continuing, but in a different form called Chronicles, which will have new articulation and packaging and updated sculpts and things like that. And how did we return to retail in 2020? Because we had new animated projects that got our foot in the door. And the first animated series was Masters of the Universe Revelation. And it was an excellent animated series that had an all-star cast and crew, and is honestly the best thing I've ever seen done with the franchise and probably ever will see done. The level of writing and animation and voice acting and music on that show is second to none. It is amazing and touched me in ways I never thought this franchise could. And if you're a longtime fan, all those things that you never thought you would see on screen that finally happened in that 10-episode series was just amazing. They also came out with a CGI series aimed at children called He-Man and the Masters Universe. And this one is a sci-fi reimagining of the franchise. And then there was also a follow-up to Revelation called Masters of the Universe Revolution. And I didn't necessarily think that the CGI series and Revolution were quite as good, but check them out anyway. It's all Masters of the Universe, and there's a lot of great ideas in both those series. And you can watch all of it on Netflix. And the last thing that got us back at retail is the Masters Universe movie. And yeah, it looked like it might not happen a few years ago, but it is happening. In June, after decades of trying, we're getting another live-action Masters of the Universe movie. And I am nowhere near as big a live-action movie guy as some of you are, right? Some of you, this is the be-all, end-all. But what I will say is that I think the trailer looks great. I think it looks like it should be a lot of fun. It looks like there's a lot of love and a lot of heart put into this movie, and I look forward to seeing it. But I will also say, I think regardless of how the movie does, the franchise is going to be fine, right? This is a $200 million movie. Those rarely make money, right? Especially now that people are not going to theaters like they used to. But the franchise is going to be fine. And to be honest with you, even if it doesn't make it up in ticket sales between the merchandising and the streaming, believe me, all the millionaires who invested in this movie are going to be just fine. And the franchise is going to be fine. The new animated series and the movie got our foot in the door. But that's not what's keeping us at retail. What's keeping us at retail is the fact that those figures are making money. That's all they care about. And the franchise is going to continue regardless of what happens. And that's very exciting. And the big difference that I have seen since 2020 that I did not see before was that I have seen people posting videos and comments who clearly do not know the history of the franchise. They weren't there in the 80s. Hell, they probably weren't even there in 2002, right? They are brand new to the franchise. We are recruiting new fans. I have not seen this before, Masters of Universe Origins. And that, to me, is super exciting. Welcome on board. Welcome to Eternia. And if you haven't collected Masters Universe or you haven't collected it since back in the day, there's never been a better time to start. A lot of the stuff that's been put out over the last 6 years is still in stock online. Just go on the websites for places like Target, Walmart, Big Bad Toy Store, MattelCreations.com, Amazon. They still have them in stock for retail and oftentimes below. There's a lot of sales, a lot of discounts. It is a great, great time to jump on. All right, guys, that's it. Like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, as they say on Eternia, good journey.